Welcome to Legal Innovation Spotlight, the podcast that brings you the latest advancements in legal tech and knowledge management. I'm Ted Theodoropoulos, and I connect with the industry's brightest minds to provide you with valuable insights and actionable takeaways. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Alex Sue, how are you this morning?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, I really appreciate you joining, man. I read some of your stuff, and you've got great videos on LinkedIn. I've been a fan, so it's awesome to have you on.
For sure. Thanks for following along. And I post a lot of crazy stuff, occasionally serious stuff. So love to talk about it more.
Yeah, well, good stuff. So you started off as an attorney yourself, right? I think at Sullivan and Cromwell. You were in e-discovery for a while. You're now a CRO at Latitude Legal. Why don't you just expand on that a little bit? Tell us, who you are, what you do, and where you do it.
Absolutely. So I'm the Chief Revenue Officer of Latitude Legal. We provide contract attorneys to law firms and legal departments. I've spent my entire career focused on legal innovation. I practiced law for 6 years, clerked for a federal judge, worked at Sullivan and Cromwell. And then about 6 years out, I decided to make a change. I found myself in California and saw that the tech startup scene was really bustling. And so, for a lot of reasons, I took a pivot, became a salesperson for selling e-discovery software, then moved to the contract management space, doing sales, then marketing. And so earlier this year, I found myself at Latitude, now leading sales and marketing as the Chief Revenue Officer. And it's been super interesting because, through my 14 or so years of experience, I've seen the practice of law evolve. I've seen software services, alternative legal services providers, all sorts of things make their way into our profession. And so, it's been great to see. And so I write about some of these topics in my newsletter, Off the Record. Very often also writing about AI, which I think is how you and I got connected, and it's some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. Your Off the Record newsletter was actually what grabbed my attention. You had an article, God, I guess it was maybe a month ago, about advice for legal tech startups or legal AI startups.
Yeah.
And I thought there was some really good nuggets in there. And I think we're fairly aligned in our perspectives on how difficult it is to disrupt the legal services market. We started off as a company called AcroWire back in 2008. It just fell into the legal rabbit hole. And, when cloud really started to take off in the enterprise, it seemed like an absolute no-brainer. Law firms were going to head that direction. I'm going back to like 2010, 2011. Yeah. And I grossly overestimated how quickly that migration would take, and wasted a lot of time and energy. I did 24 roadshows in 2014 out there, really highlighting the advantages of Microsoft 365 and SharePoint Online. And it would be a solid 8-9 plus years before big law would transition in earnest to Microsoft 365. It's finally happening now. AmLaw is moving there now. There's only a handful of firms that are still on-prem in that suite, but man, it's current state thinking and current models are pretty well entrenched. It's not easy to move in a new direction in legal tech, it seems. Is that your perspective as well?
Yeah, no, it's not easy at all. My own journey began in 2016. So a few years after that, we were selling e-discovery software that was cloud-based to law firms. And the firms would say, they would have all sorts of objections. And I remember it was 2016, 5 years before that, I had started using Dropbox for file sharing. And of course, firms are different, right? There's highly sensitive documents they've got to deal with. So it's not the same thing, but to your point, there's a bit of a lag. And so I think it's extremely topical these days because everyone keeps talking about AI, the transformation it's having on other industries. And so naturally, the conversation has shifted now to, oh, lawyers do things in a very antiquated way. Maybe AI can completely transform that. And that's why you have articles coming out that say, will AI replace lawyers? Like you see them every few months. So, part of what I was trying to write the article, like the reason for writing the article is to share kind of with the broader world that legal is different. And specifically, our ecosystem is built very differently than other industries, and specifically law firms, especially the largest ones, occupy a very unique space that has a lot of nuance that makes it both challenging to disrupt, but also creates unexpected opportunities. And so I was trying to share a little bit about that because I just started seeing a lot of tweets. Honestly, a lot of posts on social media about how AI is going to just replace law firms, and I thought that was really misinformed.
Yeah, it is. And, you see, especially lately, Harvey is an example where you've got a lot of investors like Google Ventures led their Series C round that really don't have a lot of experience in legal. And, I think there's probably, especially, the early indicators with Gen AI, what its capabilities were, the Goldman report, that 3.5 scored in the 65 percentile on the bar, and initially it was reported that 4.0 scored in the 90th percentile. That's been I guess adjusted downward quite a bit, but in the beginning there was a lot of reason for outsiders to the initial data points really kind of pointed a trajectory that was extremely steep on the transformation curve. And the reality is, in my opinion, things have been grossly overestimated in the short term. AI is absolutely going to be transformative in the legal industry, but it's going to take a little while. And I'm not sure what the perspective is with investors who aren't used to disrupting inside of legal, if their timeline, how well that is aligned with reality. Do you have any sense of that?
Yeah, it's totally not in line with reality. And I think, part of me has a lot of empathy for why the investors are so interested in legal. You look at a market where you see firms charging thousands of dollars an hour, um, handling matters and doing workflows that are really inefficient, not really leveraging software. So naturally, investors are going to think, well, we can disrupt that with tech. And I think that does happen in many industries, and I think it's been slower in legal because there's a fundamental misunderstanding of why clients pay so much money to firms. It is tempting to say, hey, if you're paying an outside firm $2,000 an hour, that somehow a streamlined AI or tech solution can do it at a fraction of the price. And so, yeah, all the clients will kind of vote with their feet and go to the AI solution. But the truth is, firms offer a lot more than just the brief or memo that you see. What you're really paying for as a client is a bucket of things that are really valuable. So, for example, I've written about the trust and long-term branding that firms care about. So, when you work with a firm, you know that the firm has spent decades, if not centuries, building up a brand of client satisfaction, keeping their clients happy, doing good work. And so you're also trusting that the firm is going to be reliable in what it produces. AI, for example, if you're replacing that firm with a startup, maybe that's a Series A startup that's just been around for a year or two, and so maybe the work that it does is 80% of the way there, which could very well be, but that last 20% matters a lot. And so it's really hard to tell from a client's perspective if they're getting really the quality, the high quality work from a startup that they would from a law firm. And it turns out that 20% or whatever, 10%, whatever you want to call it, that little bit is so important. It's it's because legal is not in the business of something like sales or marketing, where if you roughly get it right, it's okay. If you get it wrong just a little bit in legal, it has huge consequences. So I think that's fundamentally why legal work is different than say work done by other functions or other industries.
Yeah, and you had a really good point about why high hourly rates aren't nearly the problem that for clients that they would seem to be. Right. Let's drill into that a little bit. So,
Yeah.
um, t- expand on that thought.
Yeah. So when I first started off as an associate at Sullivan and Cromwell, I heard stories of how much we were charging clients and how much we were being billed out on an hourly basis. And I was like this like fresh associate. I didn't really have that much expertise. I knew that. I just worked hard, right? And I'd like to think I was smart, but it just confused me why these clients would pay so much. And so it took me a while, but I kind of zoomed out and I realized, okay, well, if you add up my hours and the hours of other members of my team and all the way up to the partners, and you kind of come up with a number every month, um, let's call it like 5 million a month. That's a pretty significant legal bill on an absolute scale. But compared to the deals and cases that we were working, these were $1 billion matters. And so, yes, the hourly rate was high, but when you kind of compared the total legal fees generated and compared it to the the matter itself, it was such a small percentage that it made me realize that um, there's more than meets the eye. You can't just look at the hourly rate in a vacuum. Yes, that would be an insane hourly rate to charge for an individual who had, say, a trust and estates matter, or I don't know, like a real estate transaction, like you're buying a house. But on the corporate side, the numbers get so big that legal fees are often just a drop in the bucket. And what really hit home for me, I didn't really realize that until much later. I didn't. The lesson didn't hit home for me until much later when I realized that hourly rates kept on going up. Like if they were so high, why would they continue going up? Why wouldn't clients leave? And it made me also understand that there are a lot of matters that law firms handle, especially the AM law firms, the largest firms in the world handle, that they're getting a great deal from the law firm because the clients are getting a great deal because if they're willing to pay so much and they're not willing to leave, then it must be that they're getting something out of it. And I think that was hard for me to understand and grasp because I was using my own frame of reference for the numbers. And I think a lot of people fall into this trap, especially those in the tech space. Like they think $1,000 an hour for a junior associate is so much, but when you zoom out, it really, the clients are the ones that are voting with their feet, and so they are continuing to pay these rates, and the rates keep going up. So there must be something there that we're not seeing on a surface level.
Yeah, and you also talked a little bit about how the decades old or century plus old reputation of the law firms inhibit disruption, right? Like talk a little bit about that. You kind of touched on it at high level, but how specifically does that come into play?
Yeah, so I think a good example to compare it to is a startup sales team. For a startup, you need revenue, or else you're not going to succeed. And so there's a huge premium placed on experimentation, trying new technology, doing things more efficiently. Because for sales, you just need to be like 50% right. Whether it's email automation that's sent out that may have typos in it, doesn't really matter. As long as the emails are going out, you're going to generate sales. And so it's a perfect fit. Law firms, on the other hand, can't do the same thing. They've been around for decades and centuries, as I mentioned, and they often get their business because they are trusted advisors to the business. They have longstanding, strong reputations individually in the legal community. And so people know that if I use this lawyer or this firm, I can be sure that I'm going to get a quality work product out of them. That type of business does not lend itself so well to technology that gets it 50% right or 80% right. I mentioned this earlier, but the bar for firms is much higher when it comes to the reliability of the technology than it is for most other businesses. And if you look at kind of how technology has made its way into firms, you can see, right, very often functionality and features play a secondary role to things like data security or reliability. The firms want to make sure that what they're using in terms of software or technology is reliable. And that's because they have this duty to their clients to make sure that they're not passing on or relying on technology that's not reliable, that leads to bad advice, that would blow up their reputation that they've taken decades and centuries to build. So that's what makes law firms very different. And there's a few other ways that law firms are different and where they sit in the entire ecosystem. But I would say that is why the bar is so high for firms, and that's why software companies often find themselves paying more attention to making sure they have data security and reliability versus the latest and greatest features.
Yeah, and another way I think reputation, law firm reputation, it affects the dynamics of the matter itself. If a one side comes to the table with, do we cheat them and how down the street, and the other side is Kirkland and Ellis, you've got that affects the dynamics before any legal actions take place. Just the weight of the reputation of the firm can ultimately impact the outcome of the case because the other side understands the capabilities, the reputation, the success rate, the relationships, the expertise, all of those things that a law firm brand brings to the table. And that is very difficult to replicate as well. Agreed?
Yeah. Yeah. There's this like really famous saying, like nobody ever got fired for using IBM. I think that it says a lot of things. It's saying that if you rely on a brand name vendor, you're not going to go wrong. That can be overstated and overdone in many parts of the world, but in legal, you can replace IBM with the name of some of these most well-known firms, like Cravath, as an example. I think I've heard nobody ever got fired for going with Cravath. Now, part of the reason is because, as you say, hiring a Cravath or a Kirkland and Ellis or whoever, that does send a message to the opposing counsel that you mean business. You're ready to spend to win the case. But it also sends a message to your internal stakeholders. So, for example, if you're the chief legal officer of a publicly traded company and you retain Cravath or Kirkland or whoever, that creates this level of it sends a message to your board because the board is likely paying attention to this litigation or matter. And the flip side of that is that if you do rely on some other firm with a lighter reputation or a firm that no one's really heard of, that can impact the perception of your competence as a CLO, as a chief legal officer. And so legal departments are very savvy about this. They know that for the most important matters, which firm they choose sends a message to their stakeholders, especially their board and to their leadership, like their CEO. So that's why it's not as simple as let's go with the cheaper option. Again, the clients are getting something, a lot of things out of spending that premium for more expensive firms.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, switching gears a little bit, talking about you and I had a great conversation about AI and its transformative effect, its impact on jobs in the industry. And I'm a firm believer. There's a fair number of analogs that we can look at to gauge what happens when game-changing technology enters the marketplace and drives efficiency significantly higher. A good example is spreadsheets in accounting. So when Lotus 123 came out sometime in the early 80s, I think it was 1983, 1984, I went back and looked, did a little research. There were about 850,000 professionals in the accounting industry at that time. Mm-hmm. I happen to remember, this is when I was really getting into computers. I was, 11, 12 years old at the time. And I remember my mom was in the restaurant business and she had an accountant who was he didn't have a computer in his office. And I was in the back of the restaurant working on that my mom owned. And he was asking me questions, and it didn't occur to me until much, much later why he was worried. He was concerned. And what has happened in that 20 or 30 years since, the number of professionals in the industry has almost doubled, right? So there's been a huge net gain of jobs, not a net loss. There's so much new legislation coming out constantly. I think there will be no legal jobs lost. I think there will be a ton of impact and redistribution of roles as a result of this technology. But I don't know, what is your take on how AI is going to impact the job market itself?
I think it's going to create more demand for legal services. We're starting to see that with litigation, but also regulation coming out around AI. Every company is going to soon become an AI company, and so that's going to create a lot of impact on what type of legal advice is needed. And I generally believe something similar to what you believe, which is this technology creates new roles. I think commentators and most of us, when we look at technology, we think, oh, this is going to replace the way many of these people who have these jobs right now. So inevitably, it's going to lead to job loss. Um, for legal in particular, I do think that we underestimate how much complexity technology adds. And that complexity needs to be solved by someone. New problems are being created every day. Like I never could have imagined that, what impact AI would have on copyright and IP. Like that's just a huge, there's going to be a lot more demand for that practice area. So there's going to be a lot of things like that where we don't expect to know where increased demand of services come from. But I mean, I can't imagine a world where AI replaces jobs and then doesn't create new ones through the increasing complexity of laws and regulation and lawsuits.
Yeah, and how much unmet need is there in the legal world? I mean, you and I talked about startups, and we have a very small investment from a venture fund, so we're largely bootstrapped, and we don't have tens of millions of dollars in our war chest that we can deploy inefficiently. We have to spend our dollars very carefully, and we do. And as a result, we negotiate. We've been doing this long enough that we negotiate a lot of red lines on our own. And maybe we'll have a lawyer look at the final draft before we execute the document. But we don't send our lawyers in with our clients' lawyers and let them have at it. No, we manage a lot of that. Ideally, I'd love to have a legal counsel manage the whole process, but it's out of reach financially for us to do that. So there's been firms out there like Wilson Sonsini with Neuron. I think Cooley Go. There's like some platforms out there where they've tried to automate some of this. Like even I can't remember which firm it is. They will draft your offer letters, which again it'd be really tough to have a person sit there and do that for free. But I don't know. How do you see automation increasing access to legal services?
I think more firms will become more tech enabled. And what that means is that their cost structure for delivering legal services will change. You're seeing that with Neuron as an example. Like they are leveraging the know-how and expertise of their lawyers to automate the creation of certain types of documents. Before you would have to have a whole team of lawyers maybe drafting something. Now it can be replicated at a low cost. And so that means that they can pass on some of those savings to clients. So I do think that, while technology and AI is not going to replace lawyers, it will become infused in the practice such that the firms that lean on innovation or technology will have an advantage. And that does have broader impact on who gets access to legal services. But the key takeaway, though, is that I do think that the firms that have leaned into innovation, whether it's experimenting, trialing software, building their own software, just really focusing on innovation, I do think that they'll have an advantage because what then happens is they can offer more to their clients or new clients at a lower price point. And as I mentioned, it is true that many of these firms can continue to charge high rates, but if they can deliver that at a lower cost and either keep their billable hours or rates similar, higher, that just means more profits. And so I do think that tech enabled is the future.
Yeah. So what about the AI's current capabilities versus the expectations in the marketplace? It feels like there's a disconnect in my mind. I see, for example, firms rolling out technologies like Copilot, Microsoft Copilot wholesale, like enterprise wide. It's happened in a few places. And, my take on Copilot is it's not very good. In fact, it is very much inferior to ChatGPT and Claude, even though Microsoft is a huge investor in OpenAI, and they clearly have access to those to the foundational model. I'm not sure exactly what they're doing to make it worse, but it is worse. As an example, I play around with it a lot and I test it. In Outlook, I pulled up the Copilot side panel, asked it how many calendar entries do I have. I'll block time off for thought leadership. How many calendar entries do I have on my calendar this week for thought leadership? Came back and said, you have 9. I actually had 12. So it was incorrect. And I know AI is not great at counting, but hear me out on this. So then I went back in and I reprompted. I was like, why did you say I only had 9? I actually have 15, even though I only had 12. He goes, oh, you're right. You do have 15. So then to further test this, I was like, all right, AI is not great at counting. Let me see if this is a Copilot problem or this is a fundamental LLM problem. So I took a screenshot and I went to ChatGPT and Claude and I uploaded the screenshot with the same prompt. They both got it right. So it's like, I feel like the marketing, and I know Microsoft's going to get Copilot right at some point, right? They're too invested in this, but right now it's just not good in my opinion. How big of a gap do you think there is between the capabilities that are being marketed by people like Microsoft who are trusted in the space, and there's this whole agentic thing, which we can talk about that later, that they're pitching with Copilot Studio. But I don't know, do you feel like they're in line, or do you feel like me that there's a bit of a disconnect?
I think we're all trying to figure out what AI is capable of, and it's hard not to get caught up in the possibility. I've not, had that experience with Copilot. I have only really played around with ChatGPT, and so my personal experience really is probably more limited than yours, Ted. But what I have noticed is that if you can do some really cool stuff with something like ChatGPT, then your mind starts thinking that it could be done for a lot of other broader use cases that may not be a good fit. The classic example in legal is legal research. You remember, like when it first came out, when ChatGPT first came out, everyone started using it for legal research, and then started hallucinating cases, and lawyers got in trouble. I think that this tech enthusiasm leads us down the wrong path. What typically happens, and I'm just analogizing to other non-AI related innovations, is new technology comes out, people get excited about it, and the initial applications are in fast-moving industries or sectors like sales and marketing, maybe customer service, and then it takes a while before it really makes its way to legal. I mean, you take cloud as an example. Like, we were using Dropbox and Box and things like that, like the cloud-based document storage, for a long time before firms did. And probably for good reason, because you kind of want things to be tested out and validated. We got to a point eventually where I think in 2024, right now, late 2024, adopting the cloud for firms seems not that controversial, but it took a long time. And so I think that's going to happen with AI too. Like right now, people are really stoked about it, really excited about it. And so it's inevitably going to have heightened expectations. You see the headlines of AI replacing lawyers, and, tweets that say AI is going to replace law firms, which again is how this all started. But yeah, I think you're right that it's we've got to keep our expectations realistic and let this play out before diving headfirst into it.
Yeah. So along those lines, how should law firms be thinking about ROI when it comes to these Gen AI and AI platforms? Do you have any insight on that?
I have some. I'll probably speak in generalities, but from what I've seen, it's got to tie into with your practice. Like, it can be tempting to see the latest and shiniest new AI tool that could do so much, but if it doesn't fit in with your practice, I think you're setting yourself up for failure. And what I mean by that is, some firms do rely on outside vendors. They will bring on new technologies for AI. Totally makes sense. Others will create their own AI that's tied to their own specific practice area strengths. That'll work too. So there's not one clear way to do it, but I do think that part of what's driving this rush to AI from the firm perspective, my sense is that many clients, and when I say clients, I really mean corporate clients, the legal departments that serve as firm clients are themselves under pressure to use AI. Boards are telling CEOs leverage AI. CEOs are telling their chief legal officers and GCs use AI. And so the legal department is also probably very interested in which firms are leveraging AI to generate efficiencies. Now, we don't know if there's truly efficiencies. I think the jury's still out on that. But there's no question that there is a broad mandate from the top down that's trickling its way out to law from boards and CEOs to the outside firms that serve them to use AI. And what I've seen really, some firms be really smart about it is that instead of just, buying the latest and greatest tool from a startup, which often can make sense again, like depending on what you need. But I've seen some firms develop their own AI and build their own models that are tied to their own proprietary data, or I shouldn't say proprietary data, but like their own documents, because it can be hard for a firm to take client matters and kind of like put it onto some third party startups training algorithm. But if they do it themselves, that's different. And so, I've personally seen some firms really leverage their own data and using AI to kind of create their own process that creates value and ROI. It's not as exciting and sexy as all the headlines, but that is something I've seen firms really benefit from AI.
Yeah. So along those lines, you and I spoke about scenarios where there are alternative approaches, like to staffing models. Law firms have to get their house in order, really, to leverage AI effectively. Most, if your AmLaw 50 or the floor of the AmLaw 50 is around 1,000 attorneys, if you have 1,000 attorneys or more, you have probably about a minimum of 100 million documents in your DMS. And that could be all sorts of content. It could be emails. It could be unused drafts. It could be red lines, 17 versions back from the final product. And it's a heavy lift, right? You can't manually curate. You can't build an army of people big enough to manually curate the entire thing like wholesale, right? You have to kind of strategically attack the problem. But it sounded like you had seen some, and I think maybe you guys, that's part of what you do is around staffing for those types of engagements. Like, tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So we talked about how AI is such a critical part of a firm's competitive advantage, or could be, but there's certainly a lot of other technology related initiatives that knowledge management or chief innovation officers are well aware of. Now here's the problem. Because of the staffing model of firms, you have associates and counsel who are essentially being billed out at very high rates. And so the opportunity cost of using your own people to work on these internal strategic projects is very high. How it plays out is essentially, let's say that your firm's decided to launch a new AI initiative, build its own proprietary AI related to a specific practice area. And you basically need associates from that group to train the model. So KM knows this, the chief innovation officer knows this. And so they ask, hey, who can help train this model? Problem is, these associates are so busy, they're not going to put the time and energy into training that AI. They're going to instead work on some matter that the partner assigns them. And so this is, I think, the one big challenge that firms are running into that Latitude helps with. So, we've worked with AmLaw firms that are struggling to staff their strategic initiatives around KM, around documents, and AI. And so we provide this associate level, so same caliber as the firm's associates, on a contract basis. And those folks are able to get the work done without that same opportunity cost. And because we provide these contract attorneys at a fraction of the rate that these existing full-time associates bill out at, it tends to be a financially attractive proposition. So, I think that because of this drive to AI for firms to build their own AI, it's created opportunities for companies like us, like Latitude, where we can provide high caliber attorneys to work on these projects so they don't kind of fall by the wayside. I think that's the big worry, is that, KM, knowledge management officers and folks, they know that some of these projects are so important, but it's just a question of how are they going to get that subject matter expertise to train the technology to work on those projects. And I think that's where we fill the gap.
And then why is there such a strong interest in building proprietary AI systems? I mean, I know a lot of firms are doing it. I know Gunderson. I had Naveen and Joe Green on from Gunderson about a little over a year ago when ChatGD came out, and it was novel at the time, but many firms have done it since then. Why is there such a strong push in that direction?
I think it's twofold. First, it's to show clients that they're serious about AI. And I mentioned earlier that mandate comes all the way straight from the top of the client's organization. So showing your clients that you're focused on AI helps. That's probably especially true for a firm like Gunderson or Wilson Sonsini, these firms that serve the technology industry. So that's like at one level. The second reason has to do with the cost of delivery. So we don't know if any of these chatbots or proprietary AI or any of these models will actually end up being more efficient. Like there's certainly a lot of risks of imperfection, hallucinations, things like that. But if AI can fulfill its promise, that could enable a firm to essentially provide the same level of service, generate the same amount of revenue and billable hours at a much lower cost structure. And again, that goes to the firm's profits. And so I think the possibility that technology can create higher levels of profit, I think that is a huge opportunity. And so those two reasons both work together to kind of drive firms towards tech adoption in ways that they haven't before, honestly, with the cloud, the internet, other innovations.
Yeah. So we used to be a custom dev shop. Our previous company was called AcroWire. We kind of rebranded and relaunched as InfoDash, a product company, in about 3 years ago. And our timing was great. We've had a fabulous run. We're having a lot of fun over here. But for many years, we would develop solutions for clients, and they would really have challenges during the handoff. So sometimes it was, KM and innovation would work with us to build a solution that ultimately IT had to support, and maybe IT had one ear in on the project, but didn't fully grasp what was coming their way when it was time to transition. And much of what I'm talking about here, it was during the on-prem days, right? So they had to stand up infrastructure sometimes that they weren't really familiar with or didn't have the capabilities to manage effectively. And, I find it interesting that so many firms are doing what you're describing, because I've seen a lot of struggles, especially in the middle market, right? Like, so let's say, AmLaw 50 to 100, right? Where they've got the resources to write the checks, but they don't have spare dev bandwidth sitting around waiting for things to do, right? If they do have any dev resources, they're fully deployed, and it's probably a fairly small team. So it seems like it would be a challenge for firms to go down this path of building, even if it's just a wrapper around an API for a model. Have you seen firms have success with this approach?
I think the jury's still out. I haven't seen, again, it's still early, and so I think we'll start to see the results in the next year or two. But generally speaking, I think part of it has to do with what the firm's top initiatives or objectives are. There are some firms where they're going to dedicate more resources because it's critical to them. Like you mentioned Gunderson, and I mentioned Wilson Sonsini. They are serving the tech industry, and so you're going to see a lot more organizational momentum and support for something like this. You could also imagine another firm that may be focused on another industry, more traditional industries, that this may not be a pressing concern. They may say, oh, I know that for example, there's one firm out there that's already come on record to say we are not going to use any sort of generative AI. And so, those are two extremes that I just provided. Some are in the middle. And so not every firm has the same appetite to push forward tech adoption and dedicate the right resources to it. So I think that's going to be a big challenge. But that's also why there's reward for those who can really be ahead of the curve and lean into it and then generate operational efficiencies, goodwill with their clients. But I think we're going to have to see how things play out in the next 12 to 24 months.
I know the firm. I think I know the firm you're talking about. That they got a lot of heat over that statement, and it really they're not a tech forward firm. In fact, I don't even think they're members of ILTA, but which is a little bit of an outlier. There's only about 3 or 4 am law firms that I know of that aren't ILTA members.
Interesting.
So yeah. So I just discovered that we're deploying a new CRM, and my sales team was like, "Hey," and we use the ILTA roster as kind of our contact list, and they were like, "Hey, where are these 3 firms?" And I went and looked, and I'll be darned, they weren't on there. So yeah, they caught a lot of heat over that. It was I don't think that was the best PR move. I don't know. What are your thoughts on somebody putting a stake in the ground and going, "Yeah, we're not using Gen AI"?
I tend to think that firms are pretty smart about all this stuff and sophisticated, and so there must have been some reason why they decided to put their stake in the ground. And one thing that I've, in my relatively short career, right, in the legal industry, have realized is that when it comes to firms, they take a lot of cues from their clients or their industry. So, for example, we talked about the tech firms that are the firms that support technology companies that are very much tech forward. They also tend to have pretty relaxed remote or hybrid work schedules, where I seem to realize that the firms that rely heavily or have serve the commercial real estate industry, they tend to have more strict return to office requirements. And so I do think firms take a cue from their clients, as they should, in focusing all of these things. And so my guess is that these firms that planted a stake in the ground, they know what they're doing. They're not doing it by accident. They are very, very thoughtful about all this stuff. And yeah, I guess, we'll see if that ends up being the right decision for them.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a good point. Well, what other, like you mentioned, the opportunity cost challenge with firms trying to manage this training and sorting of data and all that sort of stuff, using kind of in-house legal talent for that. Obviously, the opportunity cost is a big one. Are there other challenges that they might not be thinking about in that approach?
I think that, and this is a broader comment, historically, the legal industry has operated in a very simple way. It's all full-time jobs, and it's mostly at law firms or in-house legal departments, maybe government too, or nonprofit. But generally, it's all full-time roles. And I think what we're seeing, given the trends around, the pandemic, the emergence of Zoom, the adoption of cloud tools, means that you don't need to be in the same office as someone else. And what that's done is that it's led to creative approaches to sourcing talent. Now, that sourcing that talent, I mean, we work with a lot of in-house departments just to fill their roles. If they can't get a full-time hire, they leverage a contractor. That's been kind of what they've done for many years. But firms are now starting to see that there is an equally high caliber talent bench that exists in smaller cities and low cost of living areas, where you have people with big law credentials who may not want to work a traditional, law firm job in a big city. What that means for the firm is that there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and you can rely on this separate talent pool to get it done. So you can, what we've seen is like firms are leveraging contractors who have big law credentials and experience, often 15, 20 years out of law school, at a rate that's surprisingly affordable or fits into the model of the firm. And so, yes, they can be there to help with AI projects and KM projects, but we've also seen it be helpful to deploy for firms to deploy these contractors on practice areas that have sporadic demand, like ups and downs, deal flow, like maybe M&A deals that spike up sometimes and then kind of go away at other times. So innovation does include AI and technology, but it's also we're seeing an impact on the human capital side of it, the talent management side of it. So that's kind of something that's cool that I've seen just being part of Latitude, and I expect to see more of that in the coming months and years.
Yeah, I mean, that's a model that the tech world has leveraged forever. I mean, I started offshoring projects in 2006 on Odesk, which is now Upwork. But that was the marketplace for international tech talent, and I was an early adopter and had a lot of success. We have leveraged a lot of different geographies. We did a lot in the Ukraine for many years. I had a team of 8 or 9 folks over there in 2014 when the whole Crimea situation happened. And we had one client who was supporting most of that, who got nervous, and we had to pull, and we went to other areas. And now we have folks in South Africa. I have one in Bolivia. I've got someone in the UK. I've got somebody in Canada. So it's a model that's proven, and it works. And I don't know how we would get by without it. So it sounds like you're providing a very important service for these firms.
Yeah, and I think, remember, we talked about how the legal world is a couple of steps behind the rest of the business world. We can call it 5 years, we can call it 15 years. If you've been using it since 2006, then you're probably 20 years ahead of some of our clients. But tying back to our original point, I think trying something new for firms is challenging because of that whole brand reputation they've got to protect. They really value the relationship with clients. And so that's why they've been a little bit slower on it. And that's part of the reason why here at Latitude, what we do is we try to hire people who come from the industry, who have been big law partners or GCs, who have contacts in the community. That enables us to build that trust for them to essentially try something new and different. And I know that that's a really hard thing to do. And that's the job I have. That's the job you have, of convincing firms to do something differently that actually has a lot of benefits. It often is a hard slog to get there, but once you build that trust with them, I think it can lead to some of the most valuable and meaningful partnerships in the entire business world. So I think that's something that I've come to realize over my time in innovation. You really need to build that trust before you've earned the right to say, here's a way to do it differently.
Yeah, that's really good stuff. Well, this has been a lot of fun. I appreciate you coming and spending a few minutes, and I know you're busy. The CRO role is not an easy one, and we talked about before we kicked off here, this is planning season for 2025. So we just had our offsite this week, and I know you guys are working on your plans too. How do folks find out more about the writing that you do, and your newsletter and whatnot?
Yeah, my newsletter is at alexofftherecord.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn, and there's links to it there. But yeah, I'm very active on social, especially LinkedIn. So if you haven't checked out my profile or seen the stuff I've written, please do. And yeah, I'm always open to connecting.
Awesome, good stuff. And we'll include some links in the show notes as well.
Thank you, Ted. And hey, thanks for having me on the show. Really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you spending the time, and I'm sure I'll see you at one of these legal conferences. I go to about a dozen, so we'll have to connect in person while we're there.
For sure.
All right. Have a good one.
You too.
All right. Thanks, Alex. Thanks for listening to Legal Innovation Spotlight. If you found value in this chat, hit the subscribe button to be notified when we release new episodes. We'd also really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate us and leave us a review wherever you're listening right now. Your feedback helps us provide you with top-notch content. Want to dive deeper into the world of legal innovation? Connect with us online at getinfo-.com, where you'll find additional resources and articles. You can also follow us on social media at getinfo- to stay updated on the latest news and insights in the field of legal tech and knowledge management. Once again, thank you for joining us today on Legal Innovation Spotlight, a fireside chat series hosted by Info-.